So, Dhadia, you mentioned a moment ago that talking is a very important part of this.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, all of these doctors, poor guys and gals, they're listening to very unhappy people come and talk to them all the time, and they are really struggling. Does talking really help? And if so, it must be a special form of talking. It can't be just somebody turning up. I think we have a text has come through on this subject.
Yeah, this is actually kind of relevant to what you're saying about talking about these issues, I think. Vishal has texted in saying a lot of apne suffer these problems, but because we don't have the awareness or knowledge. And I think that's true. And when you don't have the awareness and knowledge, maybe a conversation isn't the best thing. Maybe talking to people who don't understand is best. Yeah. So thank you, Vishal. Thanks a lot for that.
Actually, that's quite relevant, isn't it? Often after funerals, we have the usual gathering of people, some who are genuine well-wishers and who are really there to support. But there's always the crowd who turn up and go, hi, ki hoya, oh my goodness, it's so terrible, it's terrible. It happened with me as well. And that happens, doesn't it? And that can't be the right sort of talking, I guess.
No, I think that's not the right way. But I think it's also to talk about the person, because people think that if somebody has died, it's not okay to talk. People will be upset. I think you have to forget about that and you need to talk. But when we're saying about talking, you need to talk to a professional who will guide you and help you understand where you're coming from, what are your issues, where their obstacles are. So that's what we are talking about. We can talk to our friends. It's fine to let off steam, but actually to do the work and how to change the difficulties you are experiencing, because you can't managing it on your own. So by talking, you are doing lots of different things. You work through, there's a systematic, you look at your thought diaries, you're looking at how you're thinking, how you're feeling, and what are the triggers that affect you. So you're looking at your rational, irrational beliefs. So that becomes much more, that's how you deal with in the talking therapies.
All right. Okay. Looks like we already have a reasonable conclusion. Well, one of them anyway. You don't go to the Auntie Network for therapy.
Go to a psychologist. But I was just going to say, we spoke about doctors having high suicide rates.
Yes.
Being a psychologist and hearing everyone's problems day in, day out, will that rub off on you as well? I mean, would you feel negative hearing negative stories all the time?
We are trained, and the beauty about this is that we also have supervision. So where we go and talk about the client's the difficulty that we have as a therapist with the particular client. How can we help that client? But it's looking after myself too. So it's looking after myself. So there is that provision where we have supervision with a supervisor who, a professional person. Then we work through the difficulties that we have, because sometimes in therapy we come across where issues are brought in that could touch on me as well, and how do I deal my feelings, whereas it's the client in there, and how do I support that client rather than looking at my issues, because it does shift the emphasis in the therapy.
Oh, I imagine the last thing you want to take into somebody else's mental space is your own mental baggage.
Exactly. So this is how we have to keep it to one side, acknowledge it, and then we bring it in supervision and talk about it, that this thing came up, and then it's my issue that I have to deal with it and I need to address it. And then how do I put that to one side, be aware of it, and then help the patient, the client in the therapy itself.
Okay, thanks for that. We've just got a text message from Raman who said a lot of people will not want to even seek help as they'll be labelled, and many may not get a job. People will not hire anyone with mental health issues. So this kind of relates to what we were saying in the beginning.
And this is a very important issue as well, that people do have that, because sometimes you have to fill in a questionnaire when you go for jobs, and it's a very detailed, and they ask you the last 3 years and everything else. But but the reality is that the employers who are employing you, they are not supposed to discriminate you. They need you to be truthful. So I know it's a dilemma, and people do not put certain things down, and I think that is an individual choice. So it's not to say this is right or wrong, but I can understand where this person is coming from, because it does have long term. There are still labels, and I think in the Asian community there's more of a label.
Definitely.
We like our labels.
Yes, we do.
For anybody out there who is struggling with this whole notion, I'm happy to confirm that all of the people around this table are all totally crazy. And we're proud of it. We're all having such a good time. So you're welcome to join us. This is a a very regular and common Sufi sort of strain, isn't it? That everyone is crazy, but nashe mein hone chahiye. That's a much better state to be than just be completely boring and totally mentally healthy.
Definitely. And if you've got any more text for us, the text line's 07961 387 787, or you can call us on our studio line, which is 0208 472 9292, and you can also tweet us at nusound92FM.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Prednaji. There was one thing I wanted to raise with you, which I think is featuring more and more now with our youngsters, and that is this notion of unwellness purely and solely because of an identity crisis. I've come across relatively recently interest and statistics in the Asian identity crisis, where we have youngsters who are battling to try and reconcile an identity which is from a different country and a different time, and trying to make it fit in with an identity which is dictated by the society they're in. And how do you get the two to match? Is this something you come across? Are there people out there struggling with this in as numbers that are being suggested?
There is a number where I think it's you are brought from the Eastern, and then they want to fit in with the school and with their mates. They want to go out drinking and dress that. So they sometimes, I find that they are leading a double life. They pretend that they're going to a friend's house, very simply dressed, and then they go out and then they dress up very differently. And they do struggle, and there is hard work because parents are not willing to accept that, and the community. So there is a conflict as well, and there is also a conflict about your identity, your sexuality as well, when they are not so sure whether they are precious to be heterosexual when they're not. So there are that issues as well with youngsters too, that there, and it is, so they are leading a dual life where they are what the parents want them to be, and when they are away from parents, they're living a different life. And it can be difficult at times.
But doesn't everyone do that to a certain extent? I mean,
yes, we do.
Everyone responds differently to different people, right?
Yeah, but I think this is this is more at a serious level. This is where they really want to explore themselves in their dress. Right. Yeah, they want to have their hair in a different way. They want to wear funky clothes. They want to wear different things. Not like you and I would consider normal. So what is normal?
I have funky clothes.
Yeah.
But it must be difficult though, like having a different life during the daytime and then coming home to your family and pretending to be something you're not. It must be quite difficult.
So it has a lot of stress. They are stressed because they're trying to maintain two different lifestyles and trying to, the other lifestyle is fine. They are accepted who they are, but it's the home life, the extended family. They have to fulfill a role, and that takes a toll as well on that because it does have an effect.
This is a theme that came up in our last show as well, the idea of always having to conform to other people and expectations.
Yeah, no, definitely. That Bruce Wayne syndrome can be quite difficult. We've had a couple of texts coming in, so I'm just going to read out a few from the people who've contributed. We've got a text in from Simaji who said, as we share a lot with family and friends, it's considered taboo to get medical help.
Yes.
Which seems to be... Yeah, I mean, I suppose it shows the Asian community a bit of a better light. We do talk about these things, which I suppose is true. Some things we do talk about more.
But I think now there is a lot of information. There's a lot of information out there in the radio and in the media and everything else that, it is okay to talk. So I think they are gradually opening up, but before it was difficult. But there are families still who still do not think that it's important to talk. As I said, it has long-term repercussions, marriages, what will other people think, we don't want them to know. I think that stigma still stands. It's very strong.
Yeah.
We've just had a text in from Rocky as well. Because we can't see mental issues physically, most people do not realise they need help. Thanks, Rocky. That's a really good... It's true, because if you can't see it, how do you know you have something?
Because, physically looking at it from a person, you can't. It's the behaviour when they start talking and behaving in a different way, which we consider normal. But what is normal
exactly.
is...
And say if someone's been behaving a certain way and say their parents let them get away with it, then they'll think that's normal. It's okay for them to behave like that. I mean, there's quite a few people in the community who are maybe a bit misogynistic or a bit homophobic. I know these are all labels, but they think it's okay to get away with it because they've been brought up.
And I think it is very important some of the times that who we are as a person, it's how we've been brought up, and that plays a huge role in our life.
Yeah, I think upbringing is really important. I think you were doing some research on that, weren't you, Satishji?
Yeah, I was also doing a little bit of work on it. There is something, I don't know whether our listeners have heard about Derren Brown or seen him do his hypnotism act.
Yes, I
Yes,
have.
yeah.
Well, that state that he puts people into is called a hypnagogic state.
Yeah.
Right? And I thought this was absolutely wonderful because they've mapped the way the brain works when a person is in that hypnagogic state, and they've seen how all the little bits are sparking off in certain parts of the brain and others are dormant. And then they went and checked the brain activity of children. And they found that from birth until about the age of 6, children are in a hypnagogic state. So just think about the impact of that when you're a child, if you're growing up, and whatever is being told to you, it's almost as though you're receiving it in a state of being totally hypnotized.
That's
And
really
so,
interesting.
irrespective of whether it makes sense or whether it's complete and utter nonsense, what a child is introduced to before he's 6 years old molds the personality that's then going to be built on it. Now, when you start to play with that notion that's up to 6 years old, everybody is in a hypnotic state. Just think of the things that children are being introduced to. In some traditions, at a very early age, for example, children are taught that they're sinners. So you're actually introduced to the notion that you are already a sinner and that you have got something to be guilty about even before you have a reasoning process available to you to think about. And so if you think about all of our upbringing, and you've just been talking about the impacts in upbringing, what is it that children are being exposed to in all the different cultures, in our culture, in different religions in those first 6 years? I suspect what's happening is that they are upset. And there are seeds planted which are so distressing in those first 6 years that it takes the next 40 to be able to work over them and actually come to developing a rational, stable, healthy personality.
That is true, because this is even in child psychology. You see it how children are, we mirror our things, what we are brought up. And if, for example, if you say very quickly about small children, when they're not afraid of the dark, they go out of the house. But as adults, we tell them, oh, it's dark, it's spooky. Don't go outside, it's dark. So we learn to be fearful of the dark as we are growing up. But a small child, you let them play and not tell anything. He doesn't know the difference between dark and day.
And the thing is, and I think speaking about the Asian community as well, sometimes preferential treatment is given to sons instead of daughters.
Yes.
So from a really young age, they're already being brought up, getting away with so much because they're men. And then they take that into their adult life, saying, "Okay, I'm a man.
Yes.
I'm like preferred to women, so I can behave
before
in this
this
way."
conversation goes in a totally inappropriate direction.
But it's reasonable, so we can talk about
You're
it.
absolutely right. It is a terrible message, isn't it, to give to a child that just by virtue of being who they are, they're some way deficient. So that is a really important issue, I think. I suspect that's at the root of a great deal of mental illness and unhappiness.
Yes, because as a male, if you are the eldest son, then you have the responsibility of looking after your family, and the other siblings don't get that opportunity. It's always the eldest.
Yeah.
So there is the burden. So if anything, there's a death of a family, a parent, he has to take on the role and fulfill the role, and the younger brothers don't have that role at all to fulfill. And I think this also has an impact and on the girl as well, because she's been told, oh, she'll get married, so you don't need to be educated, we don't need to spend money on you, he will be the one looking after me. And I think that also in the Asian communities is a big problem too, because then males are also being given wrong messages that they can do what they like, they are the boss, and then that causes friction. Domestic violence comes into it, and again, it's also linked in, as we're saying, whatever we are taught at childhood messages, this comes very prominent.
I mean, there were some statistics that said that women are more likely to have been treated for mental health problem than men, and that's 29% compared to 17%. So also in communities where predominantly men are given preferential treatment, it's no wonder that women are going to suffer depression and anxiety because they're surrounded by this kind of inferior complex from birth.
It is. And also sometimes you find women are at a disadvantage even in this country, because they are controlled in so much that they're not allowed to leave the home. They can't make phone calls. Their phone calls are also monitored. I've worked where people, their phone calls have been monitored. They can't go out. If they've gone to buy vegetables, they are timed. They should be back within certain times. So it becomes very difficult. You cannot talk to anyone. Who was that person? Why are you talking to them? So there are lots of other things that do add up.
Well, I think it's men with the mental issues having that much control over their women.
Moving
it's not
swiftly
right.
on.